Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of This Week in San Diego Soccer History. I'm John Cross along with Dylan Wilson, and tonight we're going to do part one of our series on the San Diego Jaws from 1976 in the NASL, since it is the 50th anniversary. Along the way, we'll do some more history snapshots and we'll do some trivia. But before we jump into all of that, Dylan, how are you doing this evening?
I'm doing well. I will say that the act of the time change is always a bit jarring, especially now in my adult life compared to when I was younger. But I think from the perspective of San Diego, like as a city, county, whatever, um,
Right.
daylight savings time makes a lot more sense. Like it just fits where the city is in the time zone because we're pretty far east in the time zone, right? San Diego's farther east than Reno, Nevada. I think people tend not to realize how far
Yeah.
east San Diego is. And so for that reason, I
Reno,
mean,
Nevada is further west than we
right,
are.
exactly. And so like, during the dead of winter, it's sunsetting at like 4:30 here, and I find that very depressing. So I personally am a big fan of the like what 9 months a year, 8.5 months a year that is spent during daylight savings time. So the change has been jarring, but I'm getting used to it, and I'm enjoying the product of it.
The change for me has been pretty smooth this year. I'm not really sure why, but um, haven't haven't had too many troubles. But I do prefer daylight savings. I love it when it's light longer. And you being from the Bay Area certainly enjoy much later summer evenings than we do down here. But I always like it when it stays light longer. I really dislike. I always hated when I was working, um, and I would leave in the dark to get into school, and then by the time I left and got home, it was dark again.
Yep,
I
the
always hated
worst.
that.
I
Yeah.
just as a frame of reference for people, it obviously varies depending on the time of the year, but the Bay Area is about the sun sets about like 28 to like 35 minutes later than it does here, depending on the time of year. So
Yeah.
it genuinely makes a big difference how far east you are in the time zone.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and kick it off with our trivia question from last week. So we left last week's episode with a trivia question. So let me get that queued up for us here. So here was the question: who was the first female coach to take their soccer team to the CIF final? And we left that to see if we get any answers. Dylan, I know you have access to the notes and everything, um, but did
I can be
do
honest and say I
you
didn't know
know?
the answer. No, and I
Yeah.
don't know who the person is, but I have heard of the school. So I'm
Ah,
giving
there we
myself
go.
credit
There's
for
a
that one.
start.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
um, yes, let's go ahead and put the answer up on the screen here. So the answer is Anne Gagnon from Castle Park High School. She led the Castle Park boys to the final in 1976, where they lost to Chula Vista High School 2-1. So that was February 27th, 1976. So she was the very first female coach to lead a soccer team, boys or girls, to a CIF final. And that was just, I don't know, the first final, I think, was in 72. The 71-72 season was, I think, the first time that boys soccer became an official varsity CIF sport rather than just a club sport. So she took the Castle Park boys team all the way to the final. So that was our first female coach to lead a soccer team to the final. And good that you're getting to learn some of these high schools. And we're heavy on the high schools right now just because of the time of year it is with
Sure,
playoffs wrapping up. Um, and we will certainly move away to that, but we'll have to see how many you remember when we get back to this next year.
sure.
Do our high school stuff.
Don't get your hopes too
All right.
high.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure some of them will start to be familiar because you just hear them a lot
That's fair.
over time. But let's go ahead and jump into some news and current events and look at who is making history right now. So I'm going to just toss it to you in general. Do you have anybody that is standing out locally that is making history?
Well, I mean, the obvious one, of course, is Duran Faree has, I think, against a lot of people's expectations, continued to get the starts in the league for San Diego FC. I think it's what, tonight they're playing Toluca in the Champions Cup, or maybe tomorrow.
I think it's tomorrow night.
Okay, I think a lot of people in the know, so to speak, are expecting that he won't start that game. But I think a lot of those people were also surprised to see that he's started the last two league games. So he's, it would be interesting to know what is the longest a goalie has started their MLS career without conceding a goal. Because remember, he came in the playoffs last year and has been excellent so far. I know there was a little bit of a scramble at the end of the last game, but I don't even think he's had that much to do. But yeah, good on him. It seems like Mikey Varas, who I think we've both spoken highly of, maybe not on this podcast, but on prior iterations, seems to be very happy to go with the hot hand, and that is definitely a coaching strategy that sometimes you love and sometimes can be a bit like huh. But in this case, it's been very exciting. I was really excited when I saw he was starting the game. It's really the only reason I've been tuning in so far this season. So.
Yeah, I was excited to see him get his third start as well. I tuned in probably to the last 30-ish minutes of the game, um, and it got a little dicey. It certainly, you know, we're not too much of a team kind of podcast, so I don't want to get too deep in the weeds here. But um, SDFC certainly didn't put away their opponents, and Duran Free had to come up with a couple of key saves. I mean, saves a goalkeeper should make, but as a 19-year-old, there were I, I wouldn't say they were nervy moments for him, but as a team, they put him in a spot where he had to come up with a couple of big saves. Otherwise, a couple of goals could have gotten in, and he did well. And hope he continues to get the start, and looking forward to his goalkeeping career.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. One of the other things I want to bring up is Sockers, which have tremendous history here in San Diego, but they are getting ready to launch a women's team to compete in the women's league of the MASL, and the team is supposed to officially start next season in 26-27. But they just had a big kind of open tryouts on Sunday, and they are going to have a couple of exhibition games coming up as they get ready, as they prep to get ready for their upcoming season. Um, we have a couple also of longtime Sockers key names that have also set lots of records with the team. But Paul Wright is going to be the technical director. Brian Farber and Eddie Velez will be helping out on staff, and Sean Bowers, as he normally does with all soccer stuff, will be overseeing the most of the operations. But they do have a couple exhibition matches coming up, and this is good to see that we're getting a women's arena team coming in to San Diego, and should start having regular matches next year.
That is exciting. I didn't know that. That's one of the cool things about owning that arena that they've constructed up there in North County. Actually, I guess I don't know that, but one of the cool things about the arena, whether or not they own it, is it allows them
They
to
do.
kind of expand. Well, there you go. They're making money off of all the traveling events. Like I know that there's been like a gymnastics tour. I know the G League team is there. So yeah, it's cool. It gives them the opportunity to make expansions exactly like this. And the MASL goes like way deeper than I ever thought. Like there's a 2 and a 3 league,
Yes.
and the W league's rapidly expanding. So like credit to them. Um, I just had no idea it went as deep as it did. Even though I was pretty into the Sockers for a while there before they moved like an hour away from me.
Yeah. It is nice to see the changes, and I've heard some talk. I don't know if it'll happen or not about doing some kind of promotion relegation between their leagues, but um, it at least they have some different tiers and structures, and a place for people to play, and now all kind of folding under one umbrella. So it will be nice to see how that all shapes out. If we turn our attention back to high school soccer, because we are, slowly wrapping up all the playoffs, we did have a school make some, well, probably go down in the record books for the wrong reasons. I don't know if you had heard Bonita Vista High School. They were one of our CIF champions for their division. Um, but when I was following the Southern California regional playoffs to see, I noticed for their game, and I don't know if it was, yeah, I think it was the day we recorded last week, and I noticed that they had forfeited, and I wondered if it was like some kind of travel issue or something else that happened. But come to find out and see some reports that, you know, all I've heard, and I haven't been able to find any good follow up on it, is there was an administrative error that led to an ineligible player being on the field. So Bonita Vista High School had to forfeit their opening round match for the Southern California Regional Finals, and they had to vacate their CIF championship that they had won.
Yikes.
So, pretty devastating news, and devastating for the players and the families. People were certainly not happy with
Yeah,
how
I
things
bet.
played out, and it's still not really clear what happened exactly. If there anybody out there listening who does know, be interested if having having some additional information. But I dug through the CIF records, and I don't see any indication ever of a team having to vacate their title in soccer. I've seen it in other sports. So um, Bonita Vista High School might go down here as the first soccer team ever, boys or girls, to have to vacate their title due to an ineligible player. So that's unfortunate.
Yeah.
And then if we look on more positive news, we sent 16 teams, 8 boys and 8 girls, to the Southern California regionals. 4 teams made it to the final match. 3 of them lost in the final, so just a shout out to Del Norte boys in Division 1, San Pasqual boys in Division 2, and Westview girls in Division 2. All made it to the finals, which is a huge accomplishment, but unfortunately lost. However, huge shout out to Coastal Academy Division 5 girls, who won the Southern California regionals and are now moving on to the state finals. And remember, this is the very first year that the state of California has done a full state soccer finals. So Coastal Academy, regardless of what happens in the final on Saturday coming up, will go down in history as the first San Diego County school to advance to a state final. So shout out to them, and congratulations to their girls soccer team.
An 8 seed as well. You'll love to see it.
An eighth seed, and they're going up, I think, against a number one seed. And
That is correct. They
I think
are.
you might be looking at it, and you are from Northern California, so
I
do
don't
you know anything
recognize.
about the
Yeah,
school they're playing?
Lowell. I
Lowell,
don't. It's
Lowell High
based in
School.
San Francisco. I don't know anything about it. There's only one school I recognize on the bracket, and that would be Oakland Tech, and they lost to Lowell in the semifinals of the region. So, I
Okay.
guess Watsonville too, but also lost in the semifinals on penalties. It looks like, or extra time. So,
Yeah, it'll be. I think they have an early game. I thought I saw like a 10 o'clock kickoff or something. So
yeah, on the 13th. So that's what, Saturday,
I'll be able to tune
Friday.
in and
Oh, whoa, that's kind of,
maybe. Oh, is it
yeah,
Friday, not
10
Saturday?
a.m. on a Friday. That's gonna be a tough watch.
Yeah. Well, not for some of us.
All right, rub it
I'll
in,
be
why
able to
don't you?
enjoy it.
Yeah.
But yeah, I may check that out and see how they do. We might have our first state champion ever from San Diego County. So good luck to Coastal Academy this weekend coming up. And then we had one of our San Diego Soccer Society members send me some information. that missed last week, but at Horace Mann Middle School, Street Soccer USA opened up a new futsal court, basically, on their campus. So I saw the article. There was an article in KPBS and a couple of other places, but just talking about the court and how much use it's getting. It just opened up in February. So thank you for our members passing along that information. Um, they're also, I think, coming up on the 21st, which is a Saturday, but 21st of March, they're going to be doing some painting of that futsal court, and the community members are invited to get out there and help, whether it's for 5 minutes or 5 hours, I think is what it says on the flyer. So, if you're in the area and you want to go check out the futsal court or help them paint their futsal field, um, head on down there on the 21st of March. But good to see. I think this is the second street soccer facility that's opened up. There's one here in Escondido in Washington Park, where I live, and I think this is their second one in the
Oh,
county, but
that's
first technically in I guess the city of San Diego.
that's actually not too far from me, to be honest with you. I might have to
Oh
go
yeah,
check that out. Yeah. Well, Horace Mann Middle School, you said, right?
Horace Mann Middle School. Yeah.
Yeah, it looks like it's the corner of 54th and Trojan Avenue, just south of
Sounds about right.
Universe El Cajon Boulevard. Yeah. Yeah, that's not too far from me. That's I'll have to go take a look.
Yeah, I should go check it out and report back and see what I've seen pictures. It looks pretty cool. They're doing lots of events and organized games, free play times, along with some organization. Where they're doing some tournaments and competitions and things. But the students, especially the middle school students, appear to really enjoy it. It's become a place, it sounds like through the article, for a lot of students to go and hang out after school to play and do things rather than, I don't know, hang out and get in trouble in the afternoon right before the parents get home. So lots of students were commenting on how much they love having the new facility.
Yeah, I can imagine. I'm sure it'll be a great thing for the community, especially. Well, they used to have something like that in North Park, the water tower, and that closed like the
Right.
week after I moved to San Diego, unfortunately. So it's good that they're opening up something to that effect, sort of in the similar area.
Yeah, and at some point we are going to have to do kind of a deep dive on the water tower, because that was a staple of San Diego soccer for decades, of people playing. So we're going to have to go and do a dive, especially for people who are newer to the area, who maybe don't know and hear people reference it, but also just how important that was in our soccer culture of the water tower, how it came about, the leagues, how many people played there. Um, it was it was a lot of fun. I'm really didn't realize the timing of that, and your arrival, but yeah, the water tower was one of the places to be to play soccer, arena soccer, of course, because of their facility, but to get out and play especially some very competitive league matches in the evening.
It's the kind of thing around which you would imagine if we had a proper football pyramid, a team may have coalesced, a club may have coalesced, a more local kind of, not top level necessarily, but a competitive local club may have coalesced around. Anyway, like you said, topic for another time.
Right. So let's well, just a quick shout to any of our listeners. Just like one of our members did, pass this along. If we've missed anything, if you know of someone who's making history right now around San Diego and San Diego soccer and San Diego soccer culture, um, drop us a line, send us a note, something, let us know, and we will make sure we help document that and get it out on our show. But I think now, before we get into our first snapshot, it's time to do our first trivia question. So let me get everything set up here. And again, sticking just a little bit with high school soccer as we wrap things up. The CIF SoCal Regional Soccer Playoff started in 2008. Since then, how many San Diego County high schools have claimed a Southern California soccer title? All right, we'll let everyone think about that. We'll do the answer after we do our um, little history snapshot. But do you have any idea, Dylan, before,
I
or
don't.
did you already see the answer?
I mean, I did, but again, I'm going to be honest. I had zero idea.
Yeah. All right, so we will do the answer after we do our history snapshot, but let's go ahead and let me get my stuff ready on my end, and we'll get ready to do our history snapshot here for, let's get it set up. Monday, March 8th through Sunday, March 14th, 1976. All right, and as we always do, we'll start off with a little cultural context. So, Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons are top of the charts with their song December 1963. Over in Africa, Morocco wins its first African Cup of Nations. And back here at home, the Carlsbad Skate Park opens, becoming the first skate park on the West Coast, and actually just missing out being the first skate park possibly in the world by just a couple of weeks. All right, and this is what was happening in San Diego soccer. In the Junior Soccer League, which was a county-wide league for high school age players, the Jack in a Box sponsored team from the South Bay comprised mostly of players from Castle Park High School, Chula Vista High School, and Montgomery High School, defeated the El Cajon team 5-1, and then finished the season with a perfect 8-0 record. They are looking next to take on the defending state champion team from Pico Rivera. That would be the two-time defending state champion from Pico Rivera in their next match. Up in the North County, the Tri-City Panteras, made up of players mostly from Oceanside, Vista, and Fallbrook high schools, advanced to the second round of the Pacific Southwest Airlines Cup soccer tournament. And they're going to face the La Jolla team at Robb Field. In college soccer, the spring junior college season is underway, and three teams are tied at the top of the table. You have Mesa College, USIU, that's United States International University, and Southwestern College are all there at the top of the table, and Southwestern and USIU are set to face each other in a top of the table clash next week. In professional soccer, the San Diego Jaws had a busy week. They signed a couple of new players early in the week, trying to round out their roster before their first games. So they picked up former San Diego State star Shea McFadden. McFadden was a Far West All-American in 1974, and he's set to play midfield or forward for the Jaws. They also pick up Jorge Castel from TJ. Castel was a walk-on free agent who tried out for the team at one of their local tryout sessions in the month of February. The coach, Derek Travis, was impressed with his technical ability, his body control, as well as his attitude. And then as the end of the week progressed, the San Diego Jaws actually had their very first preseason match ever. They took on the Dallas Tornado, and some of their key players from that team were Kyle Rote Jr. and goalkeeper Ken Cooper. Some people may know Kenny Cooper, who played for Dallas in Major League Soccer, which is his son. They took on the Dallas Tornado at Aztec Bowl on Friday night of that week. We had 6,754 people turn out to see the match, which is a good turnout. However, most of them were unpaid as they gave out free tickets to most of the youth teams and the youth leagues in the area, and I am very well aware of that because I was one of those attendees on a free ticket for that match. The game ended with a 2-0 loss to Dallas. Henry Drummond scored in the 69th minute. Kyle Rote Jr. scored 7 minutes later. By all accounts, it was a very comfortable win for Dallas. The Jaws striker, Phil Cole, had a chance to score, but it hit the post. The Jaws goalkeeper, Gary St. Clair, made quite a few excellent saves while facing 15 shots on goal. The Jaws still don't have their roster completed of what they expect to have for the season. head coach Travis expects that only about 6 of the players that played in that game against the Burn will actually be regular starters once the season begins. And that is your San Diego soccer history snapshot for Monday, March 8th through Sunday, March 14th, 1976. All right, Dylan, any thoughts?
Well, I it's interesting to learn about, excuse me, about all the Jaws, just because they, from my perspective and on the outside, I kind of previously, before talking with you about them, just thought of it as like a 1 year thing, so to understand kind of the role that it played in the larger landscape, despite only being a 1 year on the field thing. I know the effort's kind of
Right.
extended on either side of that. Um, but it's just kind of, it's interesting how sometimes something doesn't need to be around a long time to be very impactful. And so I think that's kind of one of the more interesting sides of this story. I did want to also just make a note on Morocco's AFCON win. That is actually still their only AFCON win. And they hosted this past one, which was AFCON 2025, but was played mostly in 2026. Um,
Right.
and that's part of why it was such a big deal that they lost that final at home in somewhat pretty embarrassing fashion. But I'm not trying to date
Yes.
this podcast too much. But anyway, so that they've lost, including this past year, 2 finals since. So that remains their only AFCON win. Not trying to rub it in the face of any Moroccan listeners. It is worth noting.
Yeah, it's I find and I think we'll see it when we go through part 1 of the San Diego Jaws, where we do a deeper dive into the what's going on rather than just these snapshots. It's well, it's amazing to me on like 2 different accounts. On one, in some respects, we have really advanced much further in 50 years. Our soccer culture, community, everything else is significantly further advanced than it was 50 years ago in terms of youth leagues and quality of play and all kinds of metrics. But on the other hand, as we'll see, especially when we do the part 1, it is so frustrating to me to go back and really comb through some of these newspaper articles and read things about the NASL and the local team and then the league below, the ASL. And my God, you could just substitute Major League Soccer, USL, and a San Diego Pro team in there, and it would feel like you're talking about recent events. Because in other respects, we just don't seem to learn from our mistakes very much. But we will we will talk about that a little more when we get into that section. But I'm interested in some of these snapshots because, especially in the next couple of weeks, like the Jaws had this match that they did against the Burn, and then they're getting ready to head up to the NASL indoor tournament, which we'll do some more detailed stuff about that later. And then they're going to turn around and come back and host the Cosmos and Pele um, here, and that's towards the end of March. So in future episodes, we'll dive into that part a little more deeply, and I'm excited. I'm really looking forward to those and digging into what was happening on the ground around those times, other than just Pele and the Cosmos came here to play. So that that'll be interesting. And the NAS, like, we're looking at this time period 50 years ago in 1976. So the opening match for the Jaws is going to be mid-April. So we got a few more weeks of preseason here to kind of dig in and see how the team shapes up and what happens before we really get into the actual season. All right. Kind of lost my place in my notes here. So give me just 1 second. All right. Why don't we go back and take a look at our trivia question, and let's get the answer for that. All right. So our trivia question was, right, the CIF SoCal Regional Soccer Playoff started in 2008. Since then, how many different San Diego County high schools have claimed a Southern California regional title? Right. You said you looked at the show notes, so you know the answer. Did If you were to guess, what do you think you would have?
I mean, I wouldn't
So
have even have known where to begin with that guess, just because, like I said, I just have zero functioning understanding of the landscape of like the density of high schools or like the structure of the play. So if I had to have guessed, I probably would have guessed somewhere in the 20 to 30 range, which I'm not just bullshitting that because I know the answer. Um, but that would have been my totally out of my ass guess, probably. So
yeah, so the regional soccer started in 2008, and we're
see, I
in
would have that would have been important
2026 now.
context that I definitely didn't know either. You would have needed to tell me that for that 20 to 30 guess. If I was just assuming it was all time, it'd have probably been more like 80 to 100 or something like that.
Yeah, so we've only had that for not terribly long here, and over that time, I'll get the answer here up on the screen. There have been 23 different San Diego County high schools which have won a CIF Southern California regional title. Now, I'm not going to give away the answer because we'll probably ask this another time later, but there's only two San Diego County high schools that both the boys team and the girls team have won a Southern California title. So
Well, we already
we'll
gave the
say
answer
that.
on one of them, right? Because that was last week trivia. That was one of the questions, which was the first to
No, we
do
might
that.
have. I don't remember.
Yeah. Well, incentive to go back and listen.
All right, but there were two. Um, there have only been two that have won on both the boys and the girls side. So we will we'll take a look at that um, as a trivia question a little bit later on a future episode. But let's go ahead and get into our second historical snapshot. As I get things queued up here. And we are going to do this from Monday, March 5th through Sunday, March 11th in 2001. And we're doing 2001, obviously, because that is the 25th anniversary of the San Diego Spirit. All right, so for some cultural context, and really for really kind of sad cultural context here, March 5th was the day that Santana High School was rocked by a mass shooting, which killed two students and injured several other staff and teachers. And that was certainly the big news of the week here in 2001. Lots of our sports teams and different groups, including the San Diego Padres, wore SHS for Santana High School on jersey sleeves and other things in memory of those killed and injured in the shootings. In other soccer news, really huge soccer news actually, on the same day, after 6 years post Bosman ruling, FIFA and UEFA finally agreed to a major overhaul of the player transfer system. And that is, in effect, the transfer system that we have today. So it's, I think, also important to understand in some of that context that that is not the transfer system that we have had forever. That is a fairly recent um, thing in terms of soccer. So only about 25 years have we had this kind of current transfer system, transfer windows that we all talk about now. All right, so there's your cultural context, and here's what was happening in San Diego soccer. After several rain delays, we finally get our Division 3 and Division 1 champions, which couldn't be played the previous week. Saints end up as 3-2 winners over Ramona to claim the Division 3 boys title. For Ramona, it was their fifth final appearance in 7 years, and for Saints, it was their second CIF title in 6 years. In Division 1 boys, we had Fallbrook High School, probably phrase it this way, Granite Hills High School beat Fallbrook High School 4-1. For Fallbrook High School, it was their third final appearance in 6 years without winning a championship. Fallbrook, for this particular year, was coached by soccer's legend Wad Hermes. For Granite Hills High School, it was their first CIF title in boys soccer in 26 years. And it was the first title for their head coach, Sammy Najar. Also, their junior, Chad Williams, he would win the County Player of the Year award for CIF. On the girls' side, this was a big matchup for the girls. You had number one La Costa Canyon against number two Torrey Pines High School. Um, Torrey Pines was led by sophomore Rachel Bueller, who would go on to national team fame, and La Costa Canyon was led by their senior Megan Kakadelis, who was had already committed to USC by this point. She ends up scoring the only goal of the final, and La Costa Canyon wins the CIF title for Division I girls soccer. With all the soccer kind of wrapping up, youth soccer is kicking into high gear, and youth clubs are out in force holding tryouts in the highly competitive youth soccer market. And at some point, we're probably going to have to go back and do something about the prevalence and competition of the youth soccer clubs that we had around this time period that we don't have now. They've all been kind of reabsorbed by bigger clubs. But there were so many soccer clubs around at this time period. In professional soccer, the San Diego Flash had a bit of a crazy week, which is going to lead into crazier times in the next couple of weeks. But their head coach that they had just hired, Colin Clark, stepped down to become an assistant with the Dallas Burn of Major League Soccer. The Flash owner, Jan Squara, who people may know now from his UPSL positions, but he hires the former coach that he didn't hire back, Papo Santos, who led the Flash in the first two seasons. And then the Flash also cut Mark Baina and Poway High School alum Kevin Legg for financial reasons. And those financial reasons are going to become a big thing over the next couple of weeks. The San Diego Spirit, they continued their preseason prep with a couple of closed-door scrimmages against a New York Power. In the second scrimmage, Shannon McMillan explodes for 4 goals in 21 minutes in the 5th, 19th, 23rd, and 26th minutes of play, which of course gets everyone in San Diego excited for the opening season. And then later in the week, they travel to El Paso, Texas for an exhibition match against Atlanta. And that is your San Diego Soccer History Snapshot from Monday, March 5th, 2001 through Sunday, March 11th, 2001. All right, Dylan.
Yeah, I think funnily enough, I think my girlfriend's cousin might have played on that Fallbrook High School team. I know that he
Oh,
grew up in Fallbrook, and I know he played soccer in high school, and I'm pretty sure he's in his like early mid
the
40s.
right age.
So it's like the math is mathing, I think. So if he lives in Idaho these days, so I don't know when the next time I'd see him is, but if I do, I'll have to try and remember to ask him about that.
Yeah, we'll have to see if we can get some information about that. Yeah, it would be good
Would be funny, yeah.
to get someone on record from any of these teams at these time. If anybody's out there listening, we'd like to start doing some oral history type things where we can save and preserve some people's thoughts about their experiences and times playing in these games that we're talking about throughout our soccer history. Um, but yeah, that would be cool to find out. Um, I found out actually from my brother that Kevin Legg is someone he went to school with at Poway High School because my brother graduated the same year and knows him quite well. So yeah, it's interesting for people who've been here for a while, some of the connections they have to the players that have played in and around, especially this time period of 25 years ago. The it's interesting about that FIFA UEFA decision because it was huge again for the time period, but also a lot of it had to stem from the Luis Figo transfer that happened the year before when he left Barcelona to go to Real Madrid, and the whole way that played out. Um, but yeah, that agreement and coming to in effect what we have today, it's changed slightly, but having one transfer window in the summer and having a smaller winter transfer window in January were things that were laid out in that that agreement that came up after the Bosman rulings. So yeah, that was fundamentally changed how we do transfers in world soccer. And then
I didn't
it's
realize it
also
had taken
interesting.
that long. Sorry, I didn't realize it had taken that long for them to come to an agreement, because I knew about the Bosman ruling in '95, but I didn't realize it had taken up until the Figo fiasco, for alliterative purposes, I'll call it. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, I didn't realize it had taken them that long.
yeah. It's. I mean, there was a lot that needed to go into coming up with a system, and certainly there were there were groups put together right away to try to figure out how to do this, but it did take them a while to come to this agreement. And then to go back to that girls soccer match between La Costa Canyon and Torrey Pines, but Cakadelis and Bueller would cross paths a lot in college, in U.S. national teams, and the youth teams, the under 19 team, the under 20 team, so forth, would cross paths a lot over their time. But I remember, because I was coaching high school at that time, um, I was in the same league with Granite Hills, the one who won the title. Um, and my my team, I don't remember. We probably made the playoffs, but we were probably out the first round. I have to go back and look and remember. But um, the it's I remember going back through these a lot of these names. That's not just and seeing some of these people play in some tournaments and getting a chance. But really, I mean, Cakadelis is a name that sticks out. But she was a phenomenal player and went and played in college, but didn't end up having the same kind of national team success as a Rachel Bueller did, who was, I believe, 2 years behind her on that. All right. Um, any other thoughts or comments before we get into our main topic tonight?
I don't think so.
All right. Well, before we do that, we'll do our second trivia question of the evening. And this is going to tie in a little bit to this section. And it may not appear that it's a San Diego connection at first, but there is a San Diego connection to this. So the question is, who was the coach of the Dallas Tornado when Pele made his NASL debut on June 15th, 1975? All right, and after we do our segment on the Jaws, we'll come back and give an answer to that question. I don't want you to guess yet. I'll let you guess right before we give the answer. But do you have any thoughts?
No, I have no idea. I have no
No.
idea. No.
Okay, we will come back and give the answer after we do our segment here on the San Diego Jaws. So as I get my stuff together and make sure I don't forget any of the things that I want to review for this. All right, so this is going to be part one of our series on the San Diego Jaws. We'll come back and revisit this a couple of times over the next couple of episodes, and we'll take a break for a while, and then we'll come back to it again a little later this year, because we're also going to do a story here on the Spirit and a couple of other things this calendar year, which will break up into some smaller segments like this. So San Diego Jaws were the San Diego's NASL entry in 1976. You've been hearing some bits and pieces about them as we do our historical snapshots. And what we're going to do in this first part is do a little backstory. Look at what was happening in the NASL, especially in the 1975 season. What was leading up to this 1976 season, so we kind of have some context for the San Diego Jaws coming in. But also looking at a very particular team, the Baltimore Comets, and why is it that Comets team got sold and then moved to San Diego and then renamed as the San Diego Jaws. So that'll be this first part, kind of laying the groundwork. And then we will kind of pick up the preseason and some of the go into depth in some of the league matches and how that 1976 season played out for the San Diego Jaws. All right, before we get started on this, Dylan, any questions or comments before we jump into our backstory?
N- Nothing I can say without spoiling anything we're getting into here.
Okay.
So I can, yeah, I'll hold off
All right.
until the time is right.
Got it. So let's first take a look at the 1975 NASL soccer season. And before we even jump into that, let's go back just a little further and give a history of the NASL because I think you need that context to truly understand the 75 season to help understand the context of how the Jaws were even formed in the first place. So to go back to general NASL history, in 1967, actually the year before the NASL started, we had two professional outdoor leagues, the NPSL, not to the same NPSL as our lower league NPSL that we have right now. This was the National Professional Soccer League. And you had the United Soccer Association, or the USA. Those two leagues launched, and competed against each other in 1967 and then merged to form the NASL in 1968. And that is a super simplistic overview. Like just talking about what happened between those two leagues and how that came about is a whole like podcast in itself. And we'll probably cover that at some point. But for our purposes, those two leagues merge. They create the NASL. And in that first year of the NASL in 1968, there were 17 teams. San Diego had an entry in that first one. It was the San Diego Toros, which were a team that was up in LA the year before. And then because they already had an LA team when they did the merger, they got moved down to San Diego. But they only lasted that 1968 season. And just trivia note, the SD Toros in the NASL in 1968 were we'd call them the Shield winner now, but they didn't have that back then. But they had the highest point total from the regular season. Um, so the NASL in 1968 had 17 teams. And then in 1969, you had 12 teams fold, or between the two seasons, you had 12 teams fold, which left the NASL with only 5 teams. And that was like how they survived going to that 19 and through that 1969 season is a little bit amazing with only 5 teams as a professional league. It's also the year that Philip Woosnam becomes commissioner, and he is the commissioner for quite a while, and he's the one who helps stabilize what's going on and lead to more steady growth as we're going to see here over the next few years. So in 1969, NASL is 5 teams. In 1970, from 69 to 70, we get one team that folds, but we add 2 teams. So now we're up to 6. We have a similar thing happen between 70 and 71. One team folds, but we add 3 teams. So now we're up to 8 teams. In 1972, no teams fold. We just have Washington moves to Miami, which again is a total natural product of our American sports program of teams moving places. But Washington moves to Miami, and it remains an 8-team league. In 1973, we had one team add, but no teams fold, so we're now a 9-team league. And then in 1974, this was the big change. This is also the World Cup year, right? Men's World Cup, 1974. So as we come into the 1974 season, even though 2 teams folded, 8 new teams get added, and now it's a 15-team league. They get the bump from the World Cup, and as you come into 1975, no teams fold, 5 new teams are added. So now it's a 20-team league. And at this point, because of the steady growth over the last 5 years, you've gone from 5 teams in 1969 to 20 teams in 1975, and people are thinking like we've made it. Like soccer has really landed in the U.S. So that kind of gets us to the 1975 season. So let's do a little bit. Actually, before I do the recap, Dylan, I'll let you jump in if you have any comments, and then we'll do
Well,
a little
no,
more
this is
in-depth recap of the
actually
1975 season.
this is a good segue. I wanted to say because I'm looking at the names of the 5 teams that were added in the 1975 season to bring us to 20. And so, first of all, I'd like to note the Portland Timbers, which I think you could point to as probably one of the most successful like soccer clubs, and I don't mean that in like the way we use it in America where it's interchangeable with franchise, but
Right.
I mean like it in the British sense, like a club. And I understand that the Timbers technically folded and were reformed when they joined MLS, and there's a lot of politics behind that. But I think that most Timbers fans would tell you that it's still their club, and I don't think that anybody could really reasonably tell you otherwise. So shout out to the creation of the Timbers. I think that that's something. If this were a Portland focused podcast, that's probably where we'd be beginning, right? But it's not. Anyway, the other thing I really wanted to say, which I was held off on earlier, is the Hartford Bicentennials might be the worst team name I've ever heard. And here's okay, twofold. First of all, it's not the only team name that has this problem, but it's probably the most egregious. What is your mascot gonna be? The year 200? I guarantee half the population doesn't even know what the word bicentennial means, let alone what it's in reference to. And two, the big issue here is even if it were a cool name, which it's not, see point one. Point two is that in like 5 years you're gonna have to change it anyway. So it's like it's set up to fail. One of the worst team names of all time. I just had to get that out of my system.
All right. Well, I'm going to make a comment about the bicentennials in just a second as we do the names, but um, also I want you to just retain your thoughts about the Portland Timbers because there will something that will tie into what you just said here a
Okay,
little
sure.
bit
Yeah,
later
yeah, yeah.
as well for this season. Um, but yes, in this 8th season, they had 5 new teams: Tampa Bay Rowdies, Chicago Sting, San Antonio Thunder, Hartford Bicentennials, and Portland Timbers. The Bicentennials, um, now maybe harder for people to know, but everybody knew the
Everyone was aware of
bicentennial
it.
event
Okay.
in 1975.
Well,
I,
that's
as a
fair. Yeah.
7-year-old, knew because it was
It was coming
such a
up. It
big
was the
thing.
following year, right, in 76. So, yeah.
Which is also interesting to me because I remember so much stuff that we did as a country leading up to 1976, and I think we're getting ready to do the 250 celebration, right? And it is certainly not the same. There was such a unifying kind of thing around the whole bicentennial
That's totally fair.
and the parties and celebrations. It was such a focus for 2 years. Well, maybe for a year, from July 4th, 1975, all the way through July 4th, 76.
It was a very
Um,
different political landscape at the time, but sure,
it,
point taken. I still think it's terrible, even with that context added, but fair enough. I point taken.
it it is not a good name.
Also, it's not
So
the bi and if the notes are correct here, it's not the bicentennial, which is what was happening. It's the bicentennials plural,
plural,
as in
right?
there's 11 on the field and a 20-man squad of people who are 200 years old. It's bad. I don't know. It's bad.
It's bad. Um, in 1975, besides adding these 5 teams, they also did the first ever official league wide NASL indoor tournament. Now, there had been some indoor matches that have happened previously. Most of them were one offs or exhibitions, but they had some in 74 and they were very well attended. So, this was the first year in 75 that the league decided to do an actual league wide tournament. They had 16 of the 20 teams participate. They divided them into 4 groups of 4. They treated it a little bit like the NCAA March Madness. So they had 4 regions. The winners came and played together in a Final Four style tournament. So it was very quick. You had some group games you played, and then they took the winners and moved on to a Final Four. It was all done in a matter of um, you know 2 to 3 weeks tops. But it was done kind of a kickoff to get ready for the season. So they did this league wide. The San Jose Earthquakes won this very first tournament. They beat the Tampa Bay Rowdies 8-5 in the final match. And with all of this happening with the 5 new teams coming in and the owners kind of really feeling, you know, good about themselves and good about soccer, they really started to seriously contemplate, like, what big stars could we land in 1975. So we had, you know, again, like the parallels are funny, but um, the NASL was looked at as a league where aging, mostly British stars came over to kind of finish their career or to make some extra money. You weren't really getting anybody in their prime, and you didn't have any like hugely popular names, certainly to an American audience. So, in part of this attempt, there was a big push for the Cosmos, especially to try to sign someone because Warner Communications, the big media company, the big movie making company, right? Warner Communications owned the Cosmos. And they did make an attempt in the offseason to land one of the best players in the world, and that was George Best from Manchester United. And they had agreed to a transfer fee of $240,000. And this was huge because George Best, I believe, was 27 at the time. He's in the prime of his career. Um, if you know George Best, there is, some baggage that comes along with George Best a little bit. And but they had agreed in principle transfer fee and everything, but they couldn't work out the details. And this became a big media story during the indoor tournament, kind of overshadowed what was happening with the tournament. Um, so they didn't land George Best, and that was seen as a little bit of a black eye on the league. They couldn't finalize the details and work everything out. But they did sign some other big name players. Eusebio was one of them, but those other players were not in their prime. They were older. They were not moving around as well, especially Eusebio. Um, was his knees were not really up to it coming over to play, but he was well known. There was a name that a lot of people recognized and knew. Um, it also 1975 there was a little bit of a transition. Instead of the NASL always seemed to look overseas for coaches, for players, for everything else, they started to look more internally. They started to look more at the colleges because play was getting better over the last half decade. They started to look at the league below them, the ASL, and they started poaching players there. They started getting players who were sitting on the bench for other teams. If you're a backup goalkeeper on one team, pull you over and you're the starting goalkeeper for us. So there started to be a shift in 1975 of not just we're just bringing players over on loan. We're gonna look at look internally within the borders of the United States to try to satisfy some roster requirements. So that was a shift that started. But really, and the quality of play in general at the start of the league was probably the best it's been since the very first year of the league. Had everything been building up, doing better. And of course, then you had the big news, right? By far, the biggest thing to happen in the 1975 NASL season was on June 3rd when Clive Toy, the general manager of the Cosmos, had a press conference to announce that they had signed Pele. He had agreed to come out of retirement. He just retired in 74, but he'd come out of retirement and he signed a 3-year contract for $4.7 million. And that contract made him the highest paid athlete ever. This is an American league getting, at that time, the best player in the world, even though he's well past his prime, but he is recognizable, he is marketable. I mean, the parallels between this and Messi, I just as I was going through a lot of this is interesting to say the least. Um, but they land him. He comes and plays. He makes his debut 2 weeks later on June 15th against the Dallas Tornado in a 2-2 tie. You can actually find that full match on YouTube. They have it out there. And, attendance spikes, certainly. When Pele plays, you have a ton of people show up to the matches. They're coming to see Pele. they're not necessarily coming to see their team because at the end of the season, when they look at attendance numbers, even with all the Pele matches, attendance only increases across the board like 2% or something. I mean, it's a meager attendance increase for having such big games where you're getting 30, 40,000 attend, certain matches when Pele is coming. It's also the first year in 1975 that they renamed their championship the Soccer Bowl, right, to try to capitalize on the idea of the Super Bowl. And this, shouldn't be too surprising. Lamar Hunt is the one who is usually credited with coining the term Super Bowl, and he's very involved in the NASL as an owner. So, um, the league wants to try to capitalize on that idea of a big culminating event at the end of the season. So they rename it the Soccer Bowl. Um, and then right at the end of the season, the Cosmos embark on a 10-game overseas tour. So all those highlights are great. Again, the league's feeling good and moving into 1976, but they do also notice there are some weak spots within the league, specifically two franchises, one in Baltimore and one in Denver, and something really needs to be done about them in order to to strengthen the league moving forward. All right, so before we jump into the history of the Baltimore Comets, Dylan, I'll let you jump in if you want, but I just, in putting all this together and reading through, even though I remember a lot of this as a kid, just the hype around Pele and coming to the league and being, a young soccer player and loving the sport as a kid, being able to see some things on television. I just, when I read through some of these newspaper stories and the comments from owners, it just, I could be reading about Messi coming to MLS. There's
Well, I
not
was
much
going to say it
different.
reminds me of a lot of what I don't remember what club it was, but a few clubs ended up doing it where they like issued apologies and refunds to their fans because
Yeah,
Messi didn't play in the
right.
game and they'd spent hundreds of dollars. It's ridiculous. I mean, the MLS knows that that's not a way to sustain a league. They've known that for a long time. That's why they moved away from that model 10 years ago, or however many years ago. But the other thing I wanted to say too is yes, that is the same Lamar Hunt of the Lamar Hunt U.S. Open Cup.
Yes.
It's kind of funny because he's very well known in NFL circles, especially around anybody to do with the Kansas City Chiefs. He was a pretty seminal figure in the AFL, becoming the AFC and the Super Bowl, obviously, like you said. Um, but a lot of soccer fans don't know he was such a seminal football figure, and a lot of football fans don't know he was such a seminal soccer figure. So it's just kind of funny to like have been in both of those spaces in my life and kind of see the admiration that those two separate groups have for the man without realizing the overlap. But he just genuinely loved sports, loved the idea of expanding the sport. And so I think I don't know if you could call anybody a good guy who's, in the history of American sports per se. But yeah, he definitely affected both games in the right direction in his time involved.
Yeah, he had his effect, but he was not always well liked by other owners. It was very, very, what comes across, at least from what I read, a little bit pushy in his what he wants to do. He's certainly the NFL. A lot of the NFL owners were not happy about him being so heavily involved in soccer, kind of promoting that while he's an NFL owner. They don't,
Well, that's
they don't see
communism at the
competition.
time. Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Well, no, and see, that's what I'm saying though, and like I'm sure that those people didn't like him for that reason, but that's one of the things I think you have to respect about it is like the guy had a vision.
yeah,
He didn't really care who thought what about it and just did it. And that's why the U.S. Open Cup probably he's a big part of the reason it's even still a thing today. Hence, its
yeah.
namesake being his. So yeah, he may have been a bit of a dick, but like I said, good guy, maybe a bit of a strong term, but he definitely pushed the game in the right direction.
All right, so from there, let's go and take a look at the Baltimore Comets as to what was going on with them, because those, Baltimore is one of the two weak teams, Denver and Baltimore. So while the NASL itself riding high and lots of positives to take away from the 1975 season, um, Baltimore who came into the NASL in 1974 as one of the 8 new expansion cities. And they came in at the same time as the Boston Minutemen, the Denver Dynamo, the Los Angeles Aztecs, the San Jose Earthquakes, the Seattle Sounders, the Vancouver Whitecaps, and the Washington Diplomats. They finished second in their league. They made it to the playoffs. They lost in the quarterfinals. But then the ownership group split. The partners who were part of the ownership group all left and left one person with the team, James McLaughlin. He kind of, I'll call it muddling, he muddled through the 1975 season. And I don't know, I wasn't able to find out a lot of interest of where, you know, his strong interest with soccer was. Was it soccer? Was it just trying to be an owner of a sports team? I don't know what it was, but with the ownership change and leaving just him, they had real poor management in Baltimore for the Comets in 1975. They ended up not paying their rent for their main grounds, which was Memorial Stadium. They had to finish the season at Burdick Field on the campus of Townsend State University. They didn't qualify for the playoffs, and they finished with the lowest attendance in the league of 2,641. That was their average attendance. This is also having games against the Cosmos, and right. So their lowest in the league, 2,641. And to put that just in context with some of the other teams, a team like San Jose or Portland or Seattle were having season tickets in the 10,000 and higher range for some of those teams that were averaging 18,000 people for a match. So, you know, this was horrible, and clearly it comes across from what I was able to read like an ownership group that just did not have their heart in this team, and it came across to the community, and the community just stopped showing up for the team. Um, so that was one of the ones that they knew they had to do something about it. So before we move on to some of the off-season meeting changes and decisions, um, I'll let you jump in if you have any comments about the Baltimore Comets.
No real thoughts about the comments per se, other than Baltimore as a city has been pretty hard done by teams leaving wise. I again, to harken over the NFL, this probably would have been before even the Baltimore Colts left literally in the middle of the night to Indianapolis. I think that was like what the 80s and the 90s. So whatever, that's way off topic. But my sympathies with the city of Baltimore, and I also wanted to say Washington Diplomats is also a terrible team name.
All right. Well, let's get to the NASL off season and specifically their October league meetings, because you know, regardless of what the sports media and everything else is saying, the owners are getting together to try to decide what's going to happen for 1976. And one of the biggest sticking points was this idea of whether or not to Americanize the game. And you had 3 camps. In the camp that I'll call America First, you had a group of owners who felt we needed to Americanize the game it, two, in 2 ways. Like there's 2 different parts to this. One is in terms of the audience to make it, you know, make Americans want to come watch this foreign game. But it was also in terms of developing American players. They were there was 2 kind of sides to that, but they felt that just having all these European, mostly players coming in to play in the league was not really sustainable. They needed to develop American players. So it was American players, but also cater to an American audience. That was kind of the America First. That was your St. Louis, your Philadelphia, and your Dallas, your Lamar Hunt franchise were definitely in that camp. Opposite end of the spectrum, they were, and I'll call it establish the game first. They were very much like, hey, give the fans the best players. Let the game sell itself. Why? And specifically in terms, because there was this comment about, who should kids idolize? And one of the quotes and things I read and they're from these owners is, why do American kids need American idols? Why can't they just idolize the best players in the world? And American kids seem to have no problem idolizing Pele. So what's the problem? Why do they have to be Americans, instead of a foreigner? And the basically comments like, I don't think kids care where a player is from. They just want to see good players. Um, the Portland ownership group, there was a spokesperson that just was referenced as someone from the ownership group said, like, they do not want to force feed their fans. And in this establish the game first, let the game sell itself, were Tampa Bay Rowdies, Portland Timbers, Seattle Sounders were the three key groups there. And then everybody else, I'll just call them the fence setters, they could go either way. They didn't care. I think there would be, you could argue that some of those ownership groups were like, I'll go whichever way lets me lose less money or, breaks even. So, like, convince me on the business end of it. Um, but I think it's interesting that that was a key piece of the off-season meetings. Some owners were talking in those meetings about, with Pele coming, and even the attempts to sign George Best, that it really opened the door for other foreigners. That one owner, the owner of the LA Aztecs, was saying get a dozen letters a week of players inquiring about how they could come over for the 76 season. Um, so the interest is going up. But that soccer bowl, the very first, or the final in 1975, was the first final that the NASL actually made money on. So, of course, one of the topics of conversation was, how do we expand the playoffs? How do we get more home matches and generate interest and make more revenue um, with an expanded playoffs? So that was it. And then the last thing was expansion. Where to expand? There, I would say it wasn't clear in a lot of the stuff that I read specifically, but it sure to me seemed like the ownership group that said establish the game first were more like, we should stay in bigger cities, be in cosmopolitan, multicultural areas, because there's already a lot of people who like the game, um, but kind of stay in those more cosmopolitan areas. And then there were other people, I'd argue more like the Hunts and some of the other who want to Americanize. It's like, we need to get out into the suburban areas where the soccer leagues are. We need to get out into the suburbs, because again, you got to think of the time period here. There are a lot of people who don't want to drive into the city to go to a stadium to watch a match because they're scary people there. Um, so this was a conversation. Do we go to smaller towns? Do we go into the suburbs, or do we go into the cities? Um, and they had already talked about San Diego, New Orleans, Detroit as possibly having groups that could be expansion teams. Um, so they eventually came to some decisions. One was they're going to reduce the rosters from 18 to 16, but they were going to have a reserve team. But there were stipulations because they decided to really push the American players. So decrease the rosters from 18 to 16, but you must have, so this is for 1976, you must have 6 US or Canadian citizens in your, as 6 of your 16. Teams are limited to only 5 players on loan from English clubs because that was the bulk of what was coming over. You can have a reserve team above 14 players, which then means your total roster size is 13. But 7 of the 14 must be at least permanent residents, green card holders and so forth of the US, or landed immigrants of Canada. And there can be free movement between first team and reserve team. The season would be expanded to 24 games. For tiebreakers, they would do 2 7.5-minute sudden death overtime periods followed by penalty kicks. They approved to do an indoor tournament again in 76, and they decided that the Baltimore and Denver franchises had to be relocated. Um, and they were going to move the Baltimore one to San Diego and the Denver one to Minnesota. And the actual sale of the Baltimore Comets happened at the league meeting to one of the two, because there were 2 groups apparently in San Diego. um, that were bidding for this. So one of the groups got it, and the Comets would be moved to San Diego and would eventually become the Jaws. And that officially happened on October 9th, that the league approved the sale. The owner was Ken Keegan. He's Carl Salesman from Los Gatos. And he was at the time a part owner of the San Jose Earthquakes. He announced he'd divest himself completely from San Jose. He'd be moving down to San Diego because he didn't want to be a remote owner. Terms of the sale were not disclosed, which is, pretty common in all these things. The GM of the Comets was not retained. They didn't really bring over any of the staff, front office staff, and the owner of the Baltimore Comets was given an opportunity to be part of the ownership group, but he said no, he did not want. He said he didn't have the time and he didn't want to be a remote owner, have a team all the way across the country. All right, so that's kind of gets us pretty much wrapping up the end of part one here, kind of setting the stage for, like, we have the sale now of the Baltimore Comets and, now becoming the San Diego Jaws, and the finish of the 1975 season as we look to 1976. So now, as the Jaws, they're going to have to sign American or Canadian players, which they wouldn't necessarily have had to do in previous seasons, but we now have that American requirement in there, or Canadian, but have a requirement of some more local players that have to be part of the roster. And we have an owner. He has experience with the San Jose club, and now he's ready to take on his own team. And like I said, I think that's where we're going to wrap up part one, but I'll let you jump in with some comments still in here before we officially wrap up this segment.
I just think it's interesting, the implication of a remote owner is very different today. I mean, that's kind of like the new model, right? People buy small clubs and then try and support it with like a documentary like Wrexham or like a YouTube series or something like that. So it's kind of funny that like that has completely changed, but obviously what it would look like to be a remote owner in 1976 was pretty different. So I that was just kind of interesting.
Yeah, it's I thought it was, I mean, it's interesting, some of the things that they talked about. It was funny, the reading through newspaper articles and hearing what was coming out, what was being reported coming out of the ownership meetings, which were 4 days in October. And it was, I mean, it's not too much different than when you hear Don Garber speak in MLS. It's about marketing. It's about, it's about the economics, but not really about the game. But it was very, I mean, I was pleasantly surprised to read and hear about some of these ownership groups in places like Tampa Bay and Portland and Seattle, which were more about the game and who had the higher attendances in general around these it were these teams. It was like, sell the game, be part of the community. We don't need a marketing gimmick to try to make things happen. And I cannot, because I don't know enough, especially right now, really speak to the long term of what happened with Seattle or Portland during the NASL days. But this was encouraging to hear. At least there were some voices in the room that were really pushing, even at that time 50 years ago, the game. Like, let the game sell itself. Be involved in your community. And I think, like you said early, I think we've seen that carry over in places like Seattle and Portland, who, even though it's a, like you said, totally different ownership group in MLS, in the community and the culture of the community, it's still a carryover of that from the NASL days and the community that was started, I would argue, by those original owners and supporters, and the way they treated their franchise differently than some of the other groups in the NASL.
Yeah, I have to say, like you said, and I acknowledge the ownership has changed, the structure has changed, but the Timbers like supporters and culture is pretty undeniably unchanged from those times. And I would recommend anybody who has the capacity to do so a trip to see a game at Providence Park. I think if you're a soccer fan, really has to be on your bucket list. I think it's the most unique stadium in American soccer. It's my personal favorite stadium in American soccer, but there's also something like kind of spiritual about the atmosphere. You know, like if you imagine some of those really like storied old European grounds, it kind of has that vibe where it's like you can tell there's a history to it. So I highly recommend you go. I am obviously a little biased. I love the city of Portland. My best friend lives there, and I never ever need much excuse to get up there. But that said, couldn't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I agree. I have not been, but it is one of the places I definitely would like to make sure I see a match in at some point. All right, let's get to the answer to our trivia question here before we wrap up our show. And our question was, who was the coach of the Dallas Tornado when Pele made his NASL debut on June 15th, 1975, which he scored a goal in and had an assist, I think, in the 2-2 tie. But we asked the question, we tried to keep everything San Diego related with our trivia questions. So this has a San Diego connection to it. And any guesses still, or have you looked at the answer so
I
you
have
know
looked
now?
at the answer. The name, yeah. I mean, I know the name. I wouldn't have guessed it though.
Yeah, and I'm going to put up the answer here. So the answer is Ron Newman, the longtime coach of the San Diego Sockers, came over in 1980, if I remember correctly. First with the outdoor. Well, I guess they were doing outdoor, indoor at the time, even with the NASL then. But Ron Newman, very well known here in San Diego, especially with the San Diego Sockers connection, and with on the indoor side. Ron Newman is a very interesting character and has so many things in soccer history tied to him where he's just been in I guess, the right place at the right time. But his name keeps popping up in several historical events, and we'll get to a lot more of those trivia questions with Ron Newman. But yeah, Ron Newman was a coach of the Dallas Tornado in Pele's first match. Before, I mean, there were a few other teams in between the Dallas Tornado and the San Diego Sockers, but before he became the San Diego Sockers coach, he was the coach of the Dallas Tornado in that 2-2 draw. All right. Any anything else you have before we wrap things up?
I don't believe so.
Okay. Well, we'll be back next week with another episode. We will continue part 2 of our series with the San Diego Jaws. We'll probably do 3 in a row here, so over these episodes, before we switch gears and dig into some other things with San Diego soccer history. So before we go, we're going to give I don't know, maybe it depends on your perspective. I'll say a very tough trivia question we are going to leave you with. So let me put that up right here for the question. All right, so after the WUSA folded in 2003, this former Spirit player switched sports to two-person bobsled and earned an Olympic bronze medal at the 2006 Games in Turin, Italy. Name the player.
Are they Jamaican?
So, are they Jamaican? They are not.
All right.
But we'll leave that up there for. Like I will put it in the YouTube chat area in the poll as well. So we'll see if anybody can come up with the answer to that question between this show and the start of the next one. But yes, that San Diego Spirit team had more than one player that when the Spirit season ended, when top division women's soccer ended, these athletes parlayed their skills into another sport and went somewhere else. So we have a couple other trivia questions along those lines for San Diego Spirit players. but we'll leave you with that one. So send in your trivia answers, answer them here on our YouTube page, or reach out on our Blue Sky account, which is at sdsoccerhist.org. So reach out to us on Blue Sky or on YouTube, or you can always, for anybody who wants to help us out and join, you can reach me at john@bigbinddigital.com. I have it up on the screen right now. All right, Dylan, any last things before we head out?
I don't think so. Not off the top of my head. I'm gonna try to keep up with the playoffs. I am a little curious to see how that was it the Division 5 state championship. We had a team there,
Division
so
5, yeah.
I might just rely on you to be my update reporter. But I'll try and keep tabs on that.
All right, yeah, I will do that. And we should look at maybe trying to get out and see a match next week if we can work it out. It's Open Cup
Yeah.
starts up again next
Yes.
week.
Yes.
We've got
Yes.
local UPSL league starting back up again, spring season, and we have that exhibition match with the soccer's women's team coming up.
The early rounds of the
Sunday.
Open Cup, first like 3 rounds or so, when the amateur teams are involved. Best few weeks of American soccer every year. Genuinely, it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's gonna be a crazy soccer week next week between the CONCACAF Cup and Europe tournaments and Open Cup. it's gonna be a fun week of soccer next week.
Oh yeah.
All right. Well, Dylan, thank you, and everybody else, thanks for watching and or listening to the show. And we will see you next time on This Week in San Diego Soccer History. Be sure to get out and support local soccer. Good night, everyone.